Mazda CX-9 of the first generation, 2007-2015 years of release. Good day. If you are wondering is it worth buying the first generation Mazda CX-9 and what problems you may encounter during operation, then you're at the right place. So, having received a flurry of criticism in connection with the rapidly rusting bodies of the Mazda 3 and Mazda 6, the Japanese immediately made work on the mistakes and quickly corrected the situation. As a result, it will not be possible to find a used Mazda CX-9 with serious foci of corrosion. Naturally, if the car has not been badly damaged before. As for the paintwork, it's very thin. Small scratches appear quickly on it. Polishing helped the first owners get rid of them, but now it's better to forget about this cosmetic procedure. The residual lacquer coat is too thin on most used cars. To protect the body, it doesn't hurt to apply ceramics, but not all owners are ready to spend money on this expensive procedure. As a result, outwardly, most crossovers aged 8-10 years do not look perfect. The tailgate requires special attention during inspection. It's here that rust appears first around the perimeter of the chrome lining. A closer inspection by a handful of buyers reveals several other unpleasant moments. For example, in specimens that often ride in mud, rust can be found around the fastenings of the plastic linings on the arches. Fortunately, the owners of the huge CX-9 do not drive off the asphalt often, and they try to avoid taking mud baths at all. With the safety of the bottom, things are not so good. If the previous owners didn't deal with it with additional anti-corrosion treatment, it will certainly be covered with a characteristic red bloom. Moreover, you will not be able to see it right away, since about 2/3 of the crossover bottom is covered with special plastic screens. Rust can also be found on suspension components. It's not for nothing that in the American market Mazda even recalled some of the cars to replace the corroding front levers. In the rear arches, the weak point is the shock absorber pivot point. The exhaust system also gets it. As a rule, in our conditions, it's necessary to weld its seams after 5-6 years of operation. On cars 10-12 years old, the exhaust system may even need to be replaced. Moisture in the trunk is a common occurrence in the Mazda CX-9. And all because the design of the trunk lid was not entirely successful, because of which water penetrates into the car through the corrugation of the wiring. In this case, moisture passes through the motor of the electric drive of the trunk lid, very quickly disabling its control board. Of course, due to good drainage in the side recesses, moisture in the luggage compartment niches doesn't accumulate in large quantities, but even this is often enough to keep the boot floor constantly wet. This in turn provokes the development of the corrosion process, but in the cabin of the Mazda CX-9 moisture can be found only if the owner hasn't cleared the clogged condensate drain for many years. By the way, the failed control board for the electric drive of the trunk changes separately from the motor. The board itself is inexpensive, but the craftsman will take a lot for the work of replacing it. This is because it's very difficult to get to the motor, which the engineers hid in the side niche of the body and covered it with a plastic cover, which in turn is fixed with a dozen screws. In this case, in addition to the screws, you will have to unscrew the seat belt fastening bolt, part of the thread of which goes straight into the arch and becomes covered with corrosion over time. As a result, even removing a single bolt can take several tens of minutes. To infinity ignore a broken trunk drive will also not work. This malfunction entails the failure of the supports and rods. Less serious problems include too delicate plastic for the front optics. Already with a run of 100,000 kilometers, it finally loses its presentation. Changing the headlights to new ones is relatively easy, but the price tag on them is rather big. Due to the not very successful aerodynamics of the Japanese crossover, even intact front optics can leak moisture. This leads to burnout of the ignition blocks and wiring. And if at first, when replacing the owners of Mazda CX-9, they still spent on original blocks, then after several such replacements, most of them opted for a more affordable Chinese counterpart. Enough problems with conventional halogen headlights. Their connectors are under very high stress, which leads to burning. Replacing the entire assembly is difficult and expensive, so in most cases it ends up with a ceramic core plug. In addition, the lenses of halogen headlights burn out to the mark of 100-120,000 kilometers. The same lenses, but in xenon optics, last a little longer. There are few problems with body fittings. Basically, they're associated with the appearance of the handles, the chrome coating of which will gradually peel off. Trouble can only be expected from those cars that are equipped with a keyless entry system. In severe frosts, a small elastic band on the door handle can break, after which the feeling of the handle will last very little. From time to time, Mazda CX-5 owners complain about bumper mounting strips. With age, due to loads, they begin to crack, after which the bumpers begin to sag a little. But there are no complaints about the bumpers itself. They are made of high quality soft plastic which makes them perfectly withstand small shocks when parking. There are no complaints about the ergonomics of the Mazda CX-9, which cannot be said about the durability of some finishing materials. The silver trims on the central console wear off quickly, as well as the steering wheel trim with some of the buttons being used. But the driver's seat, even with a mileage of 150–170,000 km, usually looks quite dignified. A solid mileage is given only by slightly worn seams. Slightly cheaper materials were used in the rear of the car, but given the fact that passengers are not always in the second and third rows, the finishing materials look good. The fact that the Mazda CX-5 gallery was used often will be suggested by the worn armrests, but such cars are rare even in the American market. The main selling problem is the not too large resource of the air conditioner. Its fans serve about 60–70,000 km, and if you buy an original part, they're quite expensive. However, it's enough to spend a couple of hours studying the specialized forums to find out that fans from the 7th generation Honda Accord can be used as a more affordable analog. By the mark of 100–120,000 km, the failure of the relay responsible for turning on the front and rear heaters should be expected. Plastic fittings of the climate system cannot boast of high reliability. With age, they begin to crack. The picture is complemented by the extremely unsuccessful drainage system of the air conditioner. The drain tube gradually becomes clogged, after which water begins to remain inside the system. As a result, the moment comes when the climate system of the Mazda CX-9 will require an almost complete revision. You won't be able to get away with small expenses. For example, in order to get to the ill-fated clogged tube, it's necessary to disassemble almost the entire center console. The process is long and accordingly costly. If by and large there is nothing wrong with periodic sensor failures, then it's much more difficult to come to terms with the failure of the electronics of the all-wheel drive system. The engineers were unable to achieve the required tightness, which is why the block connector on the coupling in our conditions rotted in 4 or 5 years of operation. For repair, the clutch must be removed from the gearbox, after which the electromagnet in it must be changed. If you start to farm, then you can do without replacing the electromagnet. Instead, the craftsmen solder the wires, which, given the high cost of the electromagnet, can be considered an excellent way out of the situation. Another thing is that one cannot count on the highest reliability of such an engineering solution. As for the generator's service life, it is 250–300,000 km. With the same mileage, there are no complaints about the wiring. Minor troubles include malfunctions of the multimedia system and periodic glitches of onboard electronics. From time to time, there are complaints about the side mirror drives, which according to the owners are too weak. The 3.5 and 3.7 liter units are two different versions of the same motor. This power unit can be found on many Ford models, so no problems with maintenance or finding spare parts are foreseen. The technical characteristics of the 3.5 liter engine by modern standards may not be impressive, but still good enough. Another plus is the relative tolerance for fuel of questionable quality. However, this is definitely not worth abusing. As for the disadvantages of the Mazda CX-9 engine, first of all, they should include a frankly unsuccessful cooling system. In the pump located in the collapse of the side, the bearings can wedge. In this case, the pump is driven by the gas distribution mechanism, which is why the load on its gear is quite high. As a result, if you do not pay attention to the noises during the operation of the pump, its shaft breaks out, which ends with a major overhaul of the motor. Replacing a pump is not an easy operation. Without removing the intake and completely disassembling the entire gas distribution mechanism, it cannot be carried out. And since the motor in the engine compartment stands transversely, it will have to be at least hung out to replace the pump. As a result, replacing a relatively inexpensive pump seriously devastates the family budget. If at the same time an audit of the timing is carried out, then the cost will be even higher. On average, problems with the pump begin in the range from 80 to 120,000 kilometers, although there are enough cases when the troubles began much earlier. If the car was produced before 2011, then immediately after buying a used copy, it's better to replace the pump preventively. This is especially true for those owners who prefer an aggressive driving style. Fortunately, the bearings were reinforced on more recent copies, after which the problem became less acute. Saving on high-quality antifreeze is also strongly discouraged for Mazda CX-9 owners. Officially, oil with a viscosity of 5W20 is recommended for engines of a Japanese crossover, but operating experience has shown that with a predominantly city driving with frequent movement in sluggish traffic jams, it doesn't withstand a replacement interval of 10,000 kilometers. The oil loses its original properties, which leads to seizure of the crankshaft journals. If the mileage of a used Mazda CX-9 approaches the 100-120,000 kilometers mark, it's better to switch to SAE 30 viscosity oil. When the mileage comes close to 200,000 kilometers, an oil viscosity of SAE 40 will be the best choice. Of course, with high mileage the engine will start eating up the wrong oil, but it's better to periodically control its level than to engage in major overhauls prematurely. Moreover, the Mazda CX-9 unit is officially considered non-repairable, otherwise some positive points. The resource of the gas distribution mechanism, if the pump withstands, is estimated at 200,000 kilometers. There are no complaints about attachment either. It's securely and conveniently located under the hood. In the United States, this motor is very common, so finding non-original liners, rings and other repair components will not be difficult. Another thing is that all this will have to be brought to our country exclusively on order. This will take time, and the price of initially not the most expensive parts will increase significantly. Not everything is simple with contract motors. There are enough of them, but one can hardly vouch for the quality of the overseas power unit knowing about the Americans' disregard for service. Of course, you can look for a motor from those Mazda CX-9 that were sold in Japan, but the search risks being delayed. At home, the Japanese crossover was sold in very small editions. There are very few front-wheel drive versions in our aftermarket. Basically, these cars were imported to us by their own owners from the American market. In terms of reliability, you should not worry about a mono-drive transmission. The same cannot be said about the Mazda CX-9 with all-wheel drive. The main problem is the thin bevel gearbox. For a heavy crossover, it turned out to be too weak, so that with active driving its resource decreases very quickly. There are a lot of cars on which the gearbox was replaced or restored before the run of 100-120,000 kilometers. However, there are instances with a range of under 300,000 kilometers, where the native gearbox is still installed. Owners of the Mazda CX-9 are also faced with wear on the propeller shaft. The shaft is one piece and will have to be cut to replace the intermediate bearing. Fortunately, our craftsmen have long learned to restore even those cardans that are long overdue to be scrapped. On average, the universal joint on Japanese crossover serves about 150,000 kilometers. The result is not bad, but the problem is that the overwhelming majority of used crossovers have mileage at this point. This means that the condition of the cardan should be checked especially carefully before buying. It's necessary to pay attention even to small knocks when starting from a place. Otherwise, everything can end up with expensive repairs. Automatic transmission I seen was installed not only on Mazda CX-9 but also on many models of Ford, Opel, Volvo, Peugeot. The mechanical component of the machine is very reliable, but unpleasant surprises can be expected from the valve body and the torque converter. In the latter, with an active driving style, the blocking linings quickly wear out, and the torque converter housing itself in the boxes of the first years of production turned out to be weak. The engineers had to reinforce the rear housing cover and install different damper strip springs, which made it possible to achieve more uniform wear and increase the lining life. Although in any case they will not withstand more than 200-250,000 kilometers. For fans of active driving, the lining will not withstand even this run. Dirty oil will tell you that the linings require urgent replacement. In no case should you postpone oil service, otherwise the valve body will be severely damaged. The valve body of the ICIN automatic machine itself has been seriously changed over the years of production of the Mazda CX-9. The early version is not only more sensitive to oil purity, but has more weak points in general. The valve body requiring attention will remind of itself with jerks when changing gears. In the early stages, replacing the working fluid will help get rid of them. If this is not done, then very soon it will be possible to add worn pistons, O-rings and an oil pump to the existing problems. If the box with smooth acceleration begins to switch with strong impacts, it will no longer be possible to get off with preventive measures. We'll have to prepare for a major renovation. Fortunately, early versions of the valve bodies are quite repairable. Special repair kits remove the effects of wear and tear and at the same time help to get rid of several engineering flaws. In order to save money, some owners limit themselves to replacing the solenoids, but this is nothing more than a half measure. Such a replacement doesn't give a tangible effect even in the medium term. It's not so difficult to increase the resource of an automatic transmission. First of all, for this it's worth avoiding excessively active driving. Not without reason, on the American version of the Mazda CX-9, which loses in acceleration to hundreds of kilometers per hour of the European version, a similar automatic, other things being equal, lasts longer and is less demanding for maintenance. Secondly, it's worth giving up saving on oil service and changing the technical fluid every 30–40,000 kilometers. With runs over 100,000 kilometers, the automatic transmission can be helped by installing an external oil filter and an additional cooling radiator. Suspension is the strong point of the Mazda CX-9. And it's not just about the settings that successfully combine sporty character and sufficient comfort. Even the multi-link rear suspension turned out to be quite simple in design, which had a positive effect on reliability. There are no complaints about the front suspension. Critics deserve only the anti-roll bars, which, even with careful driving, can hardly withstand more than 40,000 kilometers. When driving on bad roads, the resource of the racks is reduced to 25–30,000 kilometers. The supports of the racks can withstand on average about 100,000 kilometers. Hub bearings will require more attention. They cannot boast of durability, and when installing large 20-inch wheels, the resource is reduced even more. In addition, wheel bearings do not like the frequent overcoming of deep water obstacles. Only the bottom saves. The bearings are inexpensive. By the way, some owners who do not want to often change wheel bearings instead of original parts choose more durable counterparts from other manufacturers. As for the levers and their silent blocks, the resource can exceed 150,000 kilometers. If you are the owner, then be sure to leave a comment about this car. Your review will definitely help others with the choice of a car.